For instance, Tiananmen. Who are the ones who said Tiananmen? That's a no-no. You can't have that. And how many words are we talking about? And can that be expanded from day to day? For example, if the police raid a small village, as they have done recently, and kill people, all of a sudden the People's Daily doesn't cover that, and that's to whom many of your internet users in China will be sent, or China.com. Who makes those decisions? Is it you? Is it the people in China, the government? Why do you send internet users, and I ask this very respectfully, why do you send them to government propaganda sites? Why do, when I or anybody in this room go to Google CN, go to the disinformation site? Many of us are concerned about torture. Manfred Nowak, again, I'll use his name, UN Special Rapporteur on Torture, a scathing report on China just came out in December. If you put his name in Google CN, you go to a People's Daily report about how he wants to go to Guantanamo. And I think I and many others in this room, I certainly think he ought to be able to go to Guantanamo. I've gone there. Many members of Congress and many journalists have gone there. He ought to be allowed to go there. But the big question is, why is it that you get sent to that site, which completely, with so many young people using the Internet, they're now getting the party line. And that party line usually puts the United States in a very, 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 very bad light. And finally, are you gentlemen aware of just how widespread torture really is in China? If you or I are arrested, what I'm saying right now would fetch me a 15-year term in the Laogai. No questions asked, maybe longer. And like others will say, especially in our third panel, the human rights activists, if Harry Wu goes back after speaking today, he'll be nabbed and sent right to the Laogai and will be tortured. That's the day-to-day practice. And I deeply respect, that your companies do so much good and provide freedom of information in so many ways. I have a Yahoo email account, also an MSN email account, as does my wife. But in a repressive country, we're talking about a situation where it becomes a tool of that repressive regime. And as I said at the outset, and I think it bears repeating, propaganda and secret police are the two main pillars of any dictatorship anywhere in the world, and that includes the PRC. So if you could, go down the line and answer some of those questions.
Congressman, first off, Mr. Chairman, I'll answer the questions with respect to Shi Tao in particular. You directed those at me. Let me please state in no uncertain terms, as I did in my testimony, that our company condemns the persecution of any person for exercising their right of free expression, whether in China or anywhere else in the world. You asked about how this information is disclosed. Against the backdrop of the fact that I no longer have supervision over the day-to-day operations in Beijing following our transaction in October, but when we did have control over the day-to-day operations, we made certain that our Beijing operation would only comply with a lawful demand from an authorized agency. The demand had to be in writing. The demand had to have a seal of the agency, and the demand had to come from someone we had made sure was an authorized representative. There was no ongoing access to Yahoo files by Chinese law enforcement. These were requests, demands that we had to comply with. And no one is more troubled by this, Mr. Chairman, and when we realized this came out in the news that we had supplied information pursuant to a lawful demand that had been used for this purpose. When we established operations in Beijing, we made sure that we had this process in place. I can assure you that was unpopular with the Chinese government, with the law enforcement authorities we dealt with. It was not the practice of the other companies, local companies in the market at that time. We did take some heat for that. I wouldn't be remiss to say that. Furthermore, we have no knowledge of the identity or the purpose of the investigation when they came to demand this information about Mr. Shi Tao in particular. In addition, we followed the rigorous procedural process that we had in place. And as a backdrop, I don't think it would be appropriate for me to sit in my office in California and order a Chinese citizen in our Beijing operations not to follow a lawful demand, recognizing the very distressing consequences that caused. That could subject that person to persecution and criminal prosecution. And for that reason, Mr. Chairman, we wanted to take this issue, address it head on. By no means do we come here today and say that these are good consequences. These are horrible and distressing. But by the same token, it exemplifies for us why Yahoo cannot take this issue on by itself, Mr. Chairman. We ask for the government's help. We're encouraged by the State Department's announcement, and we're here and ready to engage with our industry peers on this topic.
Before moving on, just very briefly, it's my understanding that Gmail has made a different, or Google has made a different determination, because they have not cited the email servers inside of the repressive country, in this case China, so that access to what you term a legitimate request from law enforcement. Part of the problem we have is that law enforcement is enforcing unjust rules and regulations and laws. And there is a difference. I mean, to enforce apartheid 20 years ago or more on South Africa was profoundly unjust, yet it was a rule of law. So if it's an unjust law, somehow we would suggest, and one of the things our bill would do, would be put email service out of harm's reach to the greatest extent possible. And in terms of Alibaba, you mentioned in your testimony, and then I'll move down the line, not to belabor it, that you talked to them. What is their response when it comes? You didn't say what that was. And in a way, does that give you some plausible deniability? Because you are still a shareholder in Alibaba. And again, I mentioned the IBM and the Holocaust. One of their plausible denials was that they had IBM Germany that was doing much of the heavy lifting when it came to creating a database which included Jews that regrettably were marched off with incredible precision, and the train did run on time to the gas chambers.
Mr. Chairman, as I mentioned in my testimony, I met with senior executives at Alibaba, as did other senior executives at Yahoo, to express our concern about these issues and to encourage them to follow the very rigorous procedural protections that we had in place when we controlled the operation. I can't speak for them. I hope that they will follow that. I think they recognize how important it is to Yahoo as a major shareholder, and I believe that has some influence on that. As to the second part of your question, Mr. Chairman, about the transaction itself, plausible deniability is not a factor for Yahoo. I come to this committee today to recognize the distressing consequences of having to comply with this law enforcement demand. We recognize that we need to do our part as part of the industry and working with government to address the situation, and I mean, that's how we come to you.